For our last talk of the day, I want to bring on Nick to tell you about how we go from RWAs to being crypto native. Please give him a big round of applause.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Niklas Kunkel. I'm founder of Chronicle. Actually, really happy to be able to be here today and talk to all of you because I'm a SF native. I lived here for I don't know, somewhere around like 18 years. And now I don't, so it's always great to come home and see that like the crypto community here is so like live and going strong. But anyway, so what I want to talk to you about today is real world assets, but from a perspective of where they've been, where they're now, and where they're going, and what are the incremental steps that we've seen between each of those different versions, what are the reasons driving those changes, and what are the kind of issues with RWAs today that will drive what I call a crypto native RWA. So anyways, I think a good place to start is kind of talking about DeFi for a second. And while DeFi is still, being very actively used, I think a very sobering reality is that growth has been stagnant for the last, I would say, 2 years. And right, it's a really kind of simple thing, right? If you're using crypto as collateral and the value of crypto doesn't go up, then it's extremely difficult, right, to grow the size of a crypto protocol by 2 or 3x, right? You're essentially just like pegging your growth to the price appreciation of ETH and Bitcoin and kind of the majors. So, and there's kind of another problem associated with this, and that is essentially that that essentially even revenue, right, is very kind of boom bust, right, in this vertical, right? So if you're a crypto protocol and you make all your revenue off of the demand for leverage, if number doesn't go up, there's very little demand for leverage, right? And so you have like these boom bust cycles in DeFi revenue as well. So this is kind of what led to the what I would call like the catalyst for RWAs. And so I think the real like promise of RWAs is that you can unshackle DeFi from only being able to use this very limited capital pool and give it access to the entire kind of traditional asset capital pool where, which has, tens of trillions of dollars in it. Now, I want to talk about Maker for a second because I think they were one of the early pioneers of RWAs, and I think they make for a great case study. Full disclosure, I was at Maker for 6 years, so I'm a little bit biased. But I do really think they're like the best example to kind of like showcase this. And so, right, I mentioned earlier, right, this like DeFi boom bust, right? When you have a bull market, demand for leverage goes up and Maker makes $100 million in revenue. And then you have bear market, there's nobody looking for leverage when prices are going down and Maker's revenue tanks to like 20, 30 million. This is, not just a problem for your token price or whatever. This is also like a real like operational and organizational challenge because, in the bull market when you have lots of money, you hire a bunch of people, you start building new products, right? You innovate, and then when all that money gets cut off, right, you have to like kill all those unfinished products, right? You have to fire all of those people, right? It's like a very satisfactory, right, position to be in as an organization, right? And so the adoption of RWAs, right, was kind of minded on how do you smooth out that curve, right? How do you get revenue from different sources that are preferably like uncorrelated, right? And so this is why Maker started looking at, okay, let's start onboarding RWAs. Specifically, right, Maker wanted really low risk, high yielding T-bills, right? And so this is what I consider like the first generation of real world assets, right? There was no tokenized T-bill product on chain at the time, at least not at any significant scale or any significant liquidity. And so Maker is just like, well, if we wait for this product to happen, it will be too late. So we're just going to go do this. And so, right, the goal here was, okay, we just need something that's going to give us access to treasury bill yield, right? And we can stuff a couple billion in it, and we'll, we can make, I don't know, let's say you put 2 billion in it, and you're making, 5%, that's $100 million annually, right, that you're making in revenue. That's not correlated with what is happening in the crypto markets, right? So sounds pretty good. But there were some very deep flaws with this first generation of real world assets, right? The first is that the token is just a dummy token. It has no, holding this token gives you no actual legal claim on the funds. The funds are just held in some kind of SPV, and someone has legal ownership over that SPV. And the token is merely an abstraction that you can plug into a protocol so it can fill up its accounting ledger and say, hey, I have 2 billion of something, right? Backing the credit that was issued, right, against these assets, right? So just to clarify that, right, the way that this works is in a traditional Maker loan, right, you would lock up an asset, right, like say ETH, right, and you would borrow against that asset, and now those stable coins, right, that were generated are backed by the ETH collateral. In the RWA case, you kind of do the inverse. Let's say you mint $1 billion DAI first, and then you use that billion to go buy the T-bills, and then those T-bills are then used to back the 1 billion that was issued, right? So the end effect is the same, but you use like a little bit of a different path to get there. But going back to like the flaws with this first generation, right? Because this was kind of like a one-off and administered by Maker and several parties, the yield was actually not that great. Like we were not getting 5% yield, right? We were getting closer to like 3.5% yield. So all of this like administrative overhead was really eating into the yield. Also, they're completely opaque, right? You kind of hoped that the assets were there, and occasionally like some reports would be generated. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, sometimes the reports were late. And one of the other major drawbacks was, right, that they were really slow and cumbersome to redeem, right? So if you wanted to liquidate some treasury bills, right, it could take like multiple weeks, right, for the protocol to actually get like the stable coins back. So here's a nice little graph of like MakerDAO's like revenue distribution. So in the blue, it's like revenue generated from crypto loans. And in the yellow, what's in the graph is labeled like public credit. That's like Maker's revenue from T-bill exposure. So you can see that, right? It started off at 0, and then somewhere around like late 2022, right? We started implementing them, and then it scaled up like really, really, really rapidly. And now, right, you end up having like a much healthier, almost like 50-50 distribution of crypto loans to revenue to T-bill loans. So here's kind of the same data, I think a little bit more recent, but in kind of itemized form. So here you see at the bottom, right, 172 million is like all of the revenue from crypto-backed loans. And here you see all of the revenue from RWA-backed loans, primarily in T-bills, but there's a few other things kind of mixed in there as well. So From the RWA side, it's around $126 million annually. And so then, this summer, Maker and Spark announced the Tokenization Grand Prix. And essentially, Maker was saying, hey, you know, we're going to invest another $1 billion into RWAs, but you know, we've learned that there is some problems, right, with doing this, and so here are the problems that we see, and so like make us proposals, right? Show us what is better, make something better, right? And I think this quote that was in the press release for announcing the Tokenization Grand Prix, I think really highlights the problems that Maker saw with the first generation of RWAs, right? Is that addressing these two like primitives of liquidity-focused products and yield-focused products, right? So the two major problems that Maker saw was one, that they had too much overhead, they weren't generating enough yield, and the second, that the liquidity and speed for redemption, right, was way too slow. And so this is what I consider like the second generation of real-world assets, because they really solve those two key problems, right? So DeFi still gets access to traditional finance yield, but now the token is not a dummy token anymore. Is the token the actual underlying asset? No, absolutely not. The token tends to be a share in some underlying asset. So you can redeem the share for some equivalent amount in the underlying fund. But the important thing is now, because it's a share, you do have some legal claim on the underlying asset, right? So that's a major distinction from the first generation, is you now do have a legal claim, but the asset token is not the asset. The token is a share in a vehicle that holds the assets. Information, still pretty sparse. Sometimes you'll get monthly reports, sometimes quarterly. It really varies. Who is the information coming from? Oftentimes the asset issuer, which should immediately make you a little bit suspicious, because the person, you know, who is holding the assets is telling you, hey, I hold the assets. That's not the most trustworthy source of information. So that's still a pretty big problem to deal with. But redeemability, right, is almost instant now. Not like crypto instant, right? You do your transaction and it's, you get finality 15 seconds later, right? But you can now redeem usually, sometimes daily, sometimes within like up to 5 business days. But this is much better than the weeks we were experiencing before, right? So second gen, great. Actual legal claim, it is a productized, right? So the overhead is actually much lower, so the yield is much higher, right? And they're much more liquid, and redeemability is now not that much of a concern anymore. So who are kind of the leaders in this right now? Securitize, right, is the transfer agent for the BlackRock BUIDL fund. All right, so BlackRock issued a tokenized treasury bill product called BUIDL. I think the size of that is around between 500 and 600 million. Ondo as well issued a very similar product, also between 500 and 600 million at the moment. Superstate, who you may or may not be familiar with, is Robert Leshner's latest venture. Robert Leshner is the founder of or co-founder of Compound. They also have one, I think it's called USTB, has a couple $100 million worth of T-bills outstanding. And then, right, Franklin Templeton, I believe, has another $500 million as well, right? So we're talking about almost, just over $2 billion in tokenized treasury bill products that have really just spawned in the past year, right? And that are, so there's like significant demand for this type of product. we talked about this, right? But second gen, real world assets are not crypto native, right? The transparency is lacking, right? Information is siloed. It's still coming from the fund admin in most cases, right? And it takes too long to get the information. Now, I want to talk about third gen crypto native RWAs. Now, these don't exist yet, but I think we can kind of determine what are the properties that they're going to have and what are the market forces that are driving them to have these properties. Kind of defining what does crypto native mean, right? Ethereum is a crypto native asset, right? It is issued on a blockchain, right? And applications can use Ethereum and don't need external information to come in, right? To properly handle and touch the Ethereum token, right? With RWAs, there's too many umbilical cords, right? That kind of have to come in to support the asset and that enable a crypto protocol, right? To handle it in a responsible kind of risk managed way. And the goal is that you want to kind of minimize those that number of connections, right? And really make RWAs as crypto native as possible. And if we do that, right, then they can become a really healthy part of the crypto ecosystem and not, one giant like systemic risk bubble. So here are kind of the main ideas between the third gen crypto native RWA. First of all, assets are not custodied at some traditional finance custodian anymore. The token is the asset, right? So I think this is actually something that was pioneered in Switzerland quite a few years ago. They're very, very progressive. If you create a company in Switzerland, you can, when you create a company, you create shares in that company. You can have your shares be issued on a blockchain and use a public blockchain as your ledger for your shares in your company. The token is the share. That's really, really cool. And that's what we kind of need to get to with RWAs, right? Is that the actual token is the asset, right? That's going to be really key for having protocols be able to smoothly handle an RWA, right? Instead of having to do these like meat space interactions, right? For things like redeemability. If the token is the asset, there's no need for redeemability. Also, it means that liquidity for the token will be on chain, right? Versus liquidity has to be sourced off chain. Two, data, right? A big part of what was wrong with second generation, or what is wrong with second generation RWAs is that data availability and data integrity is still quite poor. I think oracles are going to kind of solve like a major leg of this, right? Where you can directly plug the oracle into the sources of information, right? And be streaming those pieces of information in real time. And for those of you who don't know, Chronicle is an oracle protocol, and this is kind of what we specialize in. And the third pillar, right, is this really native integration into DeFi. Going back to, right, let's maybe use Maker as an example again, right? What kind of things can you do when you have all the pieces of information, right? Let's say if you're a protocol and you have exposure to multiple RWAs. Let's say you have exposure to 10 of them, right? But you have real-time information coming in that's telling you, oh, like I can go, the yield of this one is up, the yield of this one is down. Let me go reallocate, 50 million from this bucket to this other bucket. Or, we have too much exposure to the jurisdiction of Singapore. Let's rebalance and move some more exposure to London, right? we think the credit rating of some issuer, right, has gone down, right? We want to diversify out of that, right? So there's a lot of kind of smart things that a crypto protocol can do to properly risk manage an asset when it has those real-time streams of information, and it can do so in an automated way, right, without requiring like an agent or human intervention, right, to make these decisions. So really, this is like the goal that we're working towards, right? Traditional assets and protocols kind of working in lockstep. And this is kind of the mission that is like driving Chronicle, and what's like driving our like product decisions is we really think that we are a critical element of helping RWAs level up and take that next big step. We're working with basically all of the top 5 RWA asset issuers at this point. So we're definitely the market leader in this respect. And so, if I actually see some people in the audience who I know are working on some RWA tokenized products. So if we're not working with you yet, come talk to us. So anyways, if you want to get connected, follow us on Twitter at Chronicle Labs. We also have a really cool dashboard you can check out at chroniclelabs.org/dashboard. You can see all of the different oracles we have. I don't think the RWA oracles are up there yet because we haven't launched the RWA dashboard yet, but wait for our announcements. It's going to be really cool. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And you can go have your happy hour now. I'm not going to keep you anymore.